Hello and welcome to this comprehensive tutorial on what is new in Tailwind CSS version 4. Lots of things have changed and we're going to take a deep dive into the changes one after the other. This course is part of our more than 12 hours course on Udemy titled Tailwind CSS version 4 Start to Mastery with 22 project examples. It is a comprehensive Tailwind CSS course with lots of examples to help you develop Tailwind UI and websites. Now let's get started. Hello and welcome back. Let's take a look at how to install Tailwind CSS version 4. I created a folder called Tail V4. I will install Tailwind version 4 inside this folder. Inside folder Tail V4, I will open up my VS Code with code dot. Then I'll open up the new terminal in VS Code that opens up a command line, and then I'll type the command that installs Tailwind version 4, and that is npm. Let me expand this. npm install Tailwind CSS at Tailwind CSS/CLI. Press this. It starts installing Tailwind CSS. After the installation, new files and folders are created in folder Tail V4 where I run the command. Folders like node_modules that contains Tailwind package and package.json that shows you that Tailwind version 4 is installed. The next step is to create a file that will import all Tailwind predefined classes. I will call my file input.css in a folder called CSS. So I'll create a folder called CSS and then create the file input.css in that folder. Inside the input.css file, I'll add import Tailwind CSS. The input.css file is our main CSS file where all custom CSS will be created. Right now, it only imports all predefined Tailwind CSS class, which are in their hundreds. We will use the import CSS file to generate another file, which will create the CSS file that will be attached to our HTML. The command for creating the CSS that will be attached to our HTML is npx at Tailwind CSS/CLI, and then you specify the input file -i, which is .css input.css, and then also the output file is /css. I want it to be stored in output.css. I want the file to also be here. The output file creates the CSS file that will be attached to our HTML. Let's give that a run, and you would see a new file created here, which is called output.css. The content of input.css is expanded into output.css. You can see how long that is. Let's put our HTML file inside the root folder. So I'm just going to say index.html and create my HTML file, and then create the link to output.css, and that will link to CSS output.css. Let's test our output.css now, and I'm going to put in a div, and I'll put text 3XL, and I'll just put welcome to Tailwind version 4. The text is supposed to be bigger than this, but it doesn't do anything because the output.css file has not been updated to reflect the text 3XL. To update it, I will have to run this command again. So let me run it so that it updates my output.css file, and you can see it now works. The text 3XL now makes the text bold. To ensure that I don't have to do this all the time I make a change, I will put a -- wash at the end of the command npx as shown here. So I'm going to put -- wash so that it keeps watching any change that is affecting the HTML file. So with this now, if you change to 4, you will see that the text changes. If I change to maybe 7, it changes because automatically it is running that npx file again and updating the output.css file. If you are not seeing the output changes, then ensure that the npx command is running just as you see here. Or I noticed in version 4, I would have to add a space anywhere in the HTML file to have it run the npx command again. Let's reduce this to 5. And I notice it doesn't change until I maybe press a space and then it runs it again and then it changes. So just check that in your IDE if it automatically runs or you have to press a space or something to get it to run again. Let me break out of the npx command, and I'm out of it, and I will not want to run this command every time I have to do my work. So I'll rather run it in my package.json file. So I'm going to come to package.json and add a script and say dev, and in dev I will add the full command here. And right now, anytime I do npm run dev, it's going to run that long npx command that renders output.css file. So it is script, then dev, and then npx dev in a parenthesis. Let me run that here now. I'll say npx run dev, and then I expect it to run this command. Oh, I noticed I didn't write it well, so I'm just going to put it again. So it is npx at Tailwind CSS CLI, and the input file, also the output file, and then -- watch. Now run npm run dev to run this code right here. And then you see it persistently runs, so that whatever I do right here, if I do this to 2, it's going to update the page to reflect 2XL. Hello, let's see how we can use font in Tailwind version 4. So I'm going to create a div with Lorem 50, and in this I'm going to specify the font again. Font for Tailwind version 4 sans is still the default, and we can also do serif, which is another font, and then lastly we can do mono, which gives us another font. And again, we can go to font.google.com to pick out a font, and here you can type in the font you want. I'm going to use Pacifico again. This is the style, and we'll get the font, and you can either download the font or embed it. I'm going to embed it, import, and pick out the import, and then I'll put it in my input file where I'll say import, which imports the Pacifico font. And instead of using the tailwind.config.js, this time in version 4, I can just come in and create the font Paci class and say font family is Pacifico. So I'm going to put that here, and then we go back to the index.html and create a font Paci style. It's not changing because I did font -- family, so it's font -- family, and you can see it's picking up the imported Pacifico font. You can use an imported form, or you can actually just bring in the font by first of all downloading the font. That is, instead of picking the imported version, you go to download and you pick the font you want to download. We want to download Pacifico, and then it downloads it. And I'm going to store it in a folder here. I'll call the folder fonts, and then paste the downloaded font Pacifico. This is the font, a TTF font that I downloaded from Google Fonts. I'll take out the imported form and then create a font face directive. So I'll say, let me come here, I'll say font face, and then I'll specify some parameter. The first is the font family, which is Pacifico, and then the source URL, I'll say src URL, and that is stored in the fonts folder, this folder, and in the folder is the Pacifico regular. So I will say Pacifico regular.ttf, and then I'll specify the type, the font format, So I'll say format of the font is true type. All the parameters I can specify is the font weight. I can just put that to normal, and then maybe font style, and I'll say normal. And immediately you can see it is now inheriting from this configuration. It's no longer importing from the Google font. It's now using the offline font that is added here. You can add many fonts and create those fonts here. In Tailwind version 4, all customization is done directly in our CSS instead of in a separate JavaScript configuration file. This aligns with version 4's CSS first approach, reducing reliance on a build time config. Welcome back. Let's translate the example code we did using Tailwind version 3 to the version 4 equivalent. The example creates a new text 10XL font size. You will remember that the default font size stops at text 9XL, which is 8 rems. That is, you can do, let me put welcome in a div. You can do text 9XL, which creates a big text, which is 8 rems font size. But if you do 10XL, that's not going to work because there's no 10XL. So we're going to create that in our input.css file in the themes directive as a variable. I'll do --text 10XL, and then I'll make it 10 rem. And as you can see, 10XL is rendering, and that is because we just created it in our themes variable. Not only that 10XL works, if we create 8 and 9XL, they still works because they are part of the default font size variables. If I want only my declared font size 10XL alone to be the only one that works, then I will use the theme variable to disable the default font size by doing --text with a wildcard and then say initial. This automatically disables the predefined font sizes that uses the --text classes. If I want to bring them back, I will just disable this variable. Let me just comment it out. Then you can see the default font sizes and the custom defined 10XL font size works again. Let's also add some primary and secondary colors. I'm going to add a primary color. So I'll say color primary, and I'm going to add this color. I'm also going to add different shades of secondary color. 100 will be this shade, and then variable 400 will be this shade, 600 will be this shade, and then I've added 800 shade, 900 and 950 shades. These colors are automatically available in my HTML. So let's I'm going to take out the 8 and 9 and just leave out only 10XL, and then I'm going to put a text secondary color 800, and you can see the color. The color variable is also available for all elements that is using color. For instance, if I say underline, we use the text color, and that is using the text secondary 800. If you want to change the text color, you can say decoration. Let's change it to primary color, primary, and that will change the primary color to this color as defined in our theme variable. Again, the color, let me call this welcome to. The text 9XL still exists, and you see it still works the same way. And then I can make this primary just like we did in the last one, and then secondary background of 100. It has a shade of 100. And then lastly, we can still add arbitrary values. Let me say text XL and say welcome. And I'm going to give it an arbitrary value of an hexadecimal color code. So this is the new way you would implement the example code using version 4. Hello and welcome back. Let's talk about what has changed in how Tailwind version 4 handles color using OKLCH. The default color palette in version 3 uses RGB values with shades from 50 to 950. The entire default color palette has been upgraded to use OKLCH color space instead of RGB. OKLCH offers a wide gamut and more perceptually uniform colors, making them more vibrant and consistent across devices. The naming convention, which is text, gray, 500 or whatever color from 50 to 950, remains the same, but the underlying values are refreshed. If you are relying on specific RGB values from version 3, the visual output might differ slightly in version 4 due to the OKLCH shift, even though the class name haven't changed. OKLCH is a modern color space that stands for Oclab Lightness Chroma Hue. It's designed to be perceptually uniform, meaning changes in its values, that is its lightness, chroma, and hue, corresponds more closely to how human perceives colors differences, unlike RGB or HSL. Here is a quick breakdown. Lightness. This is how light or dark the color is, and the value is from 0 to 1 or from 0 to 100%. Then chroma. This is the intensity or saturation of the color. The value is between 0 to 0.4 in practice. Then we have the hue. The hue is the color angle on the color wheel, and this is from 0 degree to 360 degree. If you look at the color wheel, you will see how the colors are separated. These are sample colors. Approximately 30 will be red, approximately 90 will be yellow, and 140 will be green, and 240 will be blue, and also 300 approximately will be purple. You can vary lightness. An average setting for lightness may be between 60 to 70% or 0.6 to 0.7. And the chroma vary. A decent saturation will be 0.2. Let's open up our project and have a paragraph text where we have padding 3 and margin 3. I'm going to put it in a div instead of a paragraph. It's all the same. So I have this. Now I'm going to come to my input.css and declare a theme directive where I will declare a color primary. And this time, instead of using hexadecimal color, I'm going to change it to an OKLCH color. I'll say OKLCH. The first parameter is the L, which is the lightness, and the lightness is between 0 to 1 or 0 to 100%. So I'm just going to say 70%. If you remember, we specified here that we can use average lightness can be 60 or 70. You can use 30, 40, depending on what you want to use. But this is just average. If you want it to be darker, you use lesser numbers. If you want it to be higher, you use greater numbers. So I'm going to have this to be 70%, or rather I could say 0.7. The next will be C, which is the chroma, that is the saturation, how rich the color is. And it is between 0 and 0.4. So I'm going to use 0.2, which is the average saturation. And then let's take a look at blue. Blue is averagely 240. So let's do 240 here. And so this becomes our primary color definition. So we can come to our code and say BG primary. I noticed we put a comma here. It shouldn't have a comma, it's just space to differentiate it. And you can see BG primary gives us this color. And you can change this variable. If you want it to be darker, you can make it say 0.4, and you see the blue will be darker. And if you want the saturation of the blue to go down, to be a little desaturated, you reduce this one. So I can say 0.05 to desaturate the color. Let me make this brighter by making it 8 and desaturating it to 0.05. And then of course you can change this. I can make this 30. 30 is more reddish look, and just play around with the OKLCH. It has a vast variety of color palettes that you can play with. And you might want to use this chart as a way to understand how the colors are separated. Hello and welcome back. Let's take a look at how to use theme variable in Tailwind CSS version 4. In Tailwind, themes variables has undergone a significant transformation compared to how theming was handled in version 3. The key difference is that version 4 moves away from the JavaScript-based tailwind.config.css file for theme configuration and introduce the add theme directive in CSS. This allows you to define and customize your design token like color, spacing, fonts within your CSS file, leveraging CSS variables. Theme variable are special variable designed for CSS. They are defined inside the add theme directive inside your inputs.css file. Let's put that in here. You say add theme, and then inside the curly brace, variables are defined here, and whatever variable you define here will generate part of the utility classes available in your Tailwind project. Also, because theme variables are tied to Tailwind CSS utilities and are used to extend them, there are proper ways to define them. If you check the documentation, you will see the definition namespaces and which utility they affect. You can see a variable for colors is -- color and then a wildcard. Also for font, you say -- font and then whatever it could be, font - sans. For text is -- which could be text -XL or whatever value, and then you have all these names specified here. Let's do a simple example where we define a mint color. So because it's color, it's going to be -- color, and then I'm going to call it mint 500, and then you put a column and then put the color. I'm going to use RGB 46BBA5. Let's use this variable in a custom class called .mint. So I'm going to create the class .mint, and I'm going to make it a background color. You would need to invoke a var function to use the theme. The var function allows you to call the value of a variable inside the theme directive. That is, if you want to call the value of this variable, that is this value, you use the var function, and then you just pass in the name of the variable. So here we will have background color, and then it will replace it with this hexadecimal number. Let's see how that pans out in our code. So I'm going to do a div mint lorem 5, and because I use the mint class, you can see it's using the mint color, background color, as specified here in our custom class. We can also use the theme variable directly inside our HTML. That is, I can create another HTML and say div lorem 10, and here I'm going to use the style and call the background color, and then pass the variable -- color mint 500, and that will also take up that mint. It's going to pass the variable in the mint - color 500 to background color. Apart from defining custom theme variables, there are also existing utility variables you can use without having a custom definition. These are called default variables. They are listed in the theme variable documentation under default theme variable references, and you can see them here. These are already predefined. So if you want to add font sans, you just say -- font sans for serif and for mono, and these are for colors, red colors, orange colors, and all the colors are all defined here. If you go down, you will see different definitions for colors, for container, for breakpoint, for text, font, blurs, and all that, and even for keyframes. There are definitions that you can use. Because they exist as default variables, you don't need to define them in the themes variable to use them because they already exist by default. Let's say I want to change the mint class to red. So I'm just going to say --color red 500, and it's going to take on the red 500 shade. This is actually similar to if you're using the theme function, that is theme color red 500, and this does the same thing and it still works well, but the theme function is deprecated in version 4 and will soon be removed. So the best way to do it is to use the theme variable, which is --color red 500, and we can add more than one. Let's change the text color and call the variable --color blue 100, and that gives us a light bluish color over a red background. Actually, you're not tied to using predefined namespaces as specified here. You can also add a custom name, say --bigger text, and we're just going to make this 2.5 rem, and then we're going to call that in font size and call the variable bigger text, and this makes the text bigger. And of course we can also add it as a style in our style here, say font size variable bigger text, and it's going to make the text bigger also. This will work, but it is not a good practice to put this type of variable inside the @theme variable namespace, since they are meant for utility classes like variable alone. The best place to put the @bigger text is in a global variable called column root. So I'm going to do that here, column root, and then I'm going to move this here, and the code still works. Variables that are defined under the @root are global variables and are not tied to Tailwind utility class generation. This allows global variables to be used by other library framework or vanilla CSS. They are independent of Tailwind CSS ecosystem. If you want to use custom variables alone and not the predefined theme variables, you can disable the predefined variable by using the initial as the value in your theme variable. Let's do that here and disable all the color predefined variable. I'm going to say --color asterisk, and then I'll say initial as the value. Now what this does is that every other color will not work except only color mint 500 and whatever color I have added here. So you see here that the color red is no longer working because this is a predefined color, and even if you come here and say BG red 500, it's not going to work because this has initialized all the color, and this is the only color that will work here. So if I put another color, let's say we have color midnight and we have this color there, I can just bring that color here instead. Let me comment this out and create the midnight variable and put it here, and then you see that the color shows as the background color. Also, every other Tailwind utility classes still work. So I can say padding 2 and margin Y3, and that still works in combination with the mint class defined in my input.css. If I don't want to use any of the predefined variable, I can initialize them by saying --asterisk, and then you see that the paragraph, this P2 and PY3 is no longer effective because I've removed all the predefined utility classes. This course is part of our more than 12 hours course on Udemy titled Tailwind CSS version 4 Start to Mastery with 22 project examples. It is a comprehensive Tailwind CSS course with lots of examples to help you develop Tailwind UI and websites. Hello and welcome back. Let's see how Tailwind version 4 handles border. In version 3, default border color is gray 200. Let's do a paragraph. We have paragraph, margin, and border. So we have these three, and then I'm just going to do lorem 15. And you're going to see that show here. And what the default value is that the border is gray 200. But if I copy this code and put it in version 4, I have opened here version 3 and version 4. And if you put it in version 4, you're going to see a difference. The border is not gray, but it is black. In version 4, the border takes on the current color. As you can see, the current color in this instance is the text color. If you change the text color on version 4, you're going to see that the border also changes to that. Let's do text green 500, and the text changes to green, and then also the border changes to green. That is not same with using version 3. If you change to text green 500 on version 3, it's only the text that will change. The border will still remain gray 200. If we want the version 4 to behave like version 3, then you have to add the border color as gray 200. And so you see it, they both look the same thing now. Let's take another example using an input text. And I'm going to give it a class of margin 3, padding 2, and then a border, and then give it a full width. And you see it has this gray 200 border across the input text. But when we do the same thing with the version 4, let's go to the version 4, you'll see that it uses the current color. Now it is a darker border. This is because in version 4, it inherits the current color. While in version 3, it has a gray 200. In version 4, it uses the current color, which is the color of the text that is in the input text. Let's add a placeholder in both input text for version 3 and version 4. For version 3, you see it is a gray color input text. And also for version 4, I'm going to put that in version 4. And it's also a gray out input text. The difference for version 4 is that version 4 uses 50% of the text color. The text color now is black, and 50% of it is what we have here. Right now it's looking the same thing, the placeholder, but you see the difference. If in version 4 we change the text to a green text, you see that the placeholder text becomes green. That is, it is 50% of the text color. The text color is green now, and then the placeholder color is also 50% transparency of the green color. Well, that doesn't work the same way in version 3. So in version 3, it still remains gray, even though the color is green. Let's add a ring to the input text. So I'll say ring, and the default effect for ring in version 3, it adds a 3-pixel blue ring. But in version 4, let's switch over to version 4, it adds just 1 pixel, and it uses the current color. It's not blue, and you can see it is a small ring compared to this 3-pixel blue ring that is added as default ring in version 3. This also applies to outline. Let's go to version 3 and then change to outline. Outline also gives a 3-pixel outline, even though it takes the color of the current color, which is green. And but for outline in version 4, it is just a pixel. And as you can see, there is outline and it takes the current color, but it's smaller than the way it appears in version 3. You can see it is smaller compared to the way version 3 own is bigger because it uses 3 pixels. If you check out the underlying code for outline in version 3, you will see it only defines the outline style, which is solid. But for outline in version 4, it defines the outline style and also the outline weight. Since the outline in version 3 is only for style, if you want to define a width, you're going to have to say outline dash maybe 2 if you want to give it 2 widths, or 4 if you want to give it 4 widths. But in version 4, because it has outline style and outline weight defined, you don't need to do outline and then say another outline 2. You're going to see a squiggly line showing that you're defining outline style and width, and then the second one is also defining outline style and width. So for version 4, you can just say outline and just specify the width you want directly. So outline dash 2 is for 2 width, outline dash 4 is for 4 width. Here you see the outline defines only outline style, and then the outline dash 4 defines outline weight. While in version 4, just this outline 4 defines the outline width and the outline style. Welcome back. Looking at our previous example code directive, version 4 still allows you to use @layer to define utilities like base layer, component layer, and also utilities layer. So technically, the output in version 4 looks the same except for a simple change in how the card renders. Because the card uses border class as specified in the card here, the border color of the card will be the current text color. As you can see, the current text color is black here, and then the border also is black. In version 3, the default border color is gray 200, and to achieve the same look, you will have to add border gray 200 to the border class. So you say border gray 200. In version 4, any element that wants to use the default border color as it is in version 3 will have to add border gray 200 to the element being styled. In addition, version 4 allows you to use theme variable in your class to style your element instead of using the @apply directive. The @apply directive will be faster to write for those who use Tailwind classes, which you will soon be acquainted with, but it will be slower to run since the Tailwind classes are again converted to vanilla CSS. You might not notice any significant difference though, except you're running a large project. So instead of doing this, I can comment this out for the H2 element and then just put vanilla CSS and say I want this to be 1.5 rem, which is text to Excel, and then font weight, I'll call that 700, which is font bold here also, and then I'll give it a margin bottom of 0.5 rem, which is equivalent to MB-2, and I can just add a theme variable for color, the text color. I'll say variable, and I'll add a default very dark red 950 as the color for the heading. So you can either use this or you use the second one. Let me add the color here too. This is text red 950, so that it also has that text, that color as specified. Again, using the vanilla CSS will be a faster method. Hello and welcome back. Let's talk about the utility directive. The utility directives gives us the ability to add more custom utility to the already shipped utility that comes with Tailwind version 4. This can be useful when there is a CSS feature you would like to include in your project that Tailwind doesn't have classes for out of the box. To create a custom utility, you start with @utility directive, @utility and then you give it a name. I'm going to call our utility text inverter. Then you put the definition inside the curly brace. I'm going to define a background color of black and then a text color of white. Now let's go to the HTML and do a paragraph tag with a margin 3 and a padding 3, and then I'm going to give it a border, and then I'll put a lorem 15 in there. We can now add the custom utility we created called text inverter. So I'll say text inverter, and that will automatically apply to the elements. You can see it's inverted white text and black background. The utility allows us to automatically have variant of the custom utility so that we can use it in pseudo element like over, focus, and the likes. Let's change this to an over effect. So I'll say over text inverter. And when you look at it now, when you put your mouse over it, it inverts the text. @utility also allows us to add functional utility that takes in an argument. Let's create a theme variable with different variants of red colors. So I'm going to create a theme variable for this example. And we have different variants of red color. I'll call this reddish 100. And then I'm going to use the OKLCH color. You can use whichever color, RGB or OKLCH, but because of this example, I'm just going to use the OKLCH. So I'll say OKLCH 069, and then the chroma, I'll start with quite desaturated chroma, and then 30, which is a bit reddish color. My aim is to create different variants of this reddish color by changing the chroma, the saturation. So I'm going to create 5 of it. So we'll have 200, 300, 400, and 500. And I also changed the values to reddish 100, 200 to 500. And then I changed the chroma, the saturation level, so that the color changes. It gets more saturated as the number increases. Now let's do the utility. We will create a functional utility called red fade. So I'll say utility, and then I'll call it red fade, and then I'll put an asterisk. The value for asterisk is a replaceable value. In this instance, I'll want it to be replaced with 100, 200, 300, 400, and 500 as declared here in the theme variable. So I'm going to open that up and do a background color, and then I'll say dash dash value. The dash dash value is used to resolve utility values. So I'm going to take any of this color, the color variable, reddish, and then I'll say dash asterisk, so that the value is going to take here is any of 100 to 500. Now let's see that at work with the HTML. I'm going to come here and also do another paragraph with a margin 3 and a lorem 15. I can now add the red fade utility, and I'll start with 100. You see here it is asterisk, red fade asterisk, which will take in any of this number. And when you put 100, it's going to use this color. Let me have it re-rendered. It's not working. I can see where the fault is. I didn't specify the correct name here. I did only 1 dash, so it's supposed to be 2 dashes, and that should give me the color that I want. And I'm going to repeat this 5 times, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then change the value, and you will see that the value changes for 200, for 300, for 400, and then 500. Welcome back. Let's look at using bare value in utility directive. Utility directive allows you to define custom utility classes that can accept dynamic value known as bare values. This feature enhances the flexibility of your design system by enabling utility to handle various input types directly with your CSS. At utility directive can take bare values from theme-based values like we just did in the previous example. Let's take a font example using theme-based variable, and I'm just putting in 3 variables for spacing, SM, MD, and LG, and I'm going to declare the utility for that. I'm going to call it FS asterisk, and then I'll use font size and also use value to take in the value spacing asterisk. So I'm going to create my HTML file now using FS as the utility class. So that will be a lorem 5, just a simple lorem here, and then I'm going to say FS. The first one is SM, and you will see it reduces the size. Sorry, this is not there. And then I'm going to do MD, and MD is this, and then LG. LG is 24 pixel. Let's now improve this by just using bare values. I'm going to comment this out and do another font size, and I'm going to use value, and I'll just say integer. So whatever integer you put here is going to say font size and then put the integer. Let's try that out. I'm going to take this out and say FS, let's say 20. This is not going to work, but I just want you to see. You see nothing is changing, and that's because it will replace 10 here. It will say font size 10, but it doesn't know what measurement to use. So to give it a measurement, I'll just put a px at the end. So px tells it that it is 10 px, 10 pixel, and we have 20 now. If we say 20 px, it gives you this size. Let's make it 30 px so that we see the difference. We just put 30, but because we had px in our definition, it knows we're using px. You can put rem also at the back. What Tailwind does in default classes is to put a 0.025 rem calculation at the back. So I'm going to do the same thing again, but this time I'm going to use a calculation to decide how the value translates. So I'll say integer, and instead of just leaving it this way, I will use the calc function and say multiply by 0.25 rem, and you see immediately it's now using a rem calculation. This 30 is actually 30 multiplied by 0.25 rem, just the same way Tailwind does. So FS1 is 0.25 rem, FS2 is 0.5 rem, and let's say FS4, which is 1 rem actually, which is equivalent to 16 pixel. If you're not using the integer value, you can also use a length value. Let's do it again. This time I'm going to say font size, and then the value will be length in a bracket. Then we can do it this way, say 1 rem, and it's going to translate that to 1 rem. Let's do 2 rems, and you can see the difference. It's going to translate it to 2 rems calculation. And of course you can also do pixel. Let's do 30 pixel, and it's going to translate that to font 30 pixel. Let's do 40 pixels so you see, or 50 pixels so you see the difference. And then also you can add multiple values using the value function. I'm going to do another one. I'll say size, and this time it's going to be value. I'm going to put in 2 values. The first will be the theme value, that is spacing asterisk, and then I'll also use the length value. So I'll put length. So now we can use the spacings, and then we can use also the length. Let's give that a try. Let's say I want an SM value, and you can see how that responds. SM, LG, and also I can also use the length, the arbitrary length, which I can put in 4 rem or 3 rem, and you see it also responds. It responds to theme, and then it responds also to this bare value. And you're not tied to just one value. You can do multiple value. Let's do for padding and margin. So I'll say utility PM, that's for padding and margin. And then I'll say padding should take in a value of integer, but I'm going to have it calculate the integer using rem. So I'll use the calculate function because I want it to work the way Tailwind implements its own, which is you multiply it by 2.5 rem. And then I would also say margin. So these two, when I say PM whatever number, it's going to be adding padding and margin. Let's do an example here. I will say P lorem 30. Okay, so I'm going to give it a border so that we can see a border around it. And then I'll say MP3. It's not MP, it is PM. I think we defined it as PM here, not MP. And already you can see that it's giving it 3 margins and then 3 border at the same time. And also I can use multiple of it. I'm just going to use the text inverter that I did the other time. And now you see the text is also been inverted. Hello and welcome back. Let's look at how gradient is implemented in version 4. Tailwind made some changes to how gradient classes work. If you have version 3 gradient codes, they will still work, but it is best to upgrade to version 4 because the old way of doing it is deprecated and will soon be removed in subsequent releases. In version 4, we can do linear gradient, radial gradient, and conic gradient, which makes it more flexible and clarity is added to how they are declared. Let's start with linear gradient. I'm going to put the syntax here, linear gradient. So to declare it, you say BG linear, and you either use integer to define the angle or you use letters to define the angle. If you're using integer, you will say BG linear from 0 to 330, and then they have 30 interval. That is, it could be 0, it could be 30, it could be 60, it could be 90. If you want to do for the letters, you say BG linear to L, which is left, to T, which is top, B, which is bottom, T, which is top, and TR, top right, top left, bottom right, and bottom left. Let's comment this out and then create a parent div that has margin 3 and padding 3, and in between I'm going to create a div, and in the div I'll give it a font bold, text XL. I just want this to be the background classes that will be used, text SL H 14, and then the border, I'll make the border gray 300, and the text center, so that we have something like this. And if I put a word in between, it appears this way. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a utility class with this because I want us to focus on just the gradient classes. So I'll pick these out and come under my utility layer, create grad1 utility class, and I will apply all that style in here. And then I'm going to call grad1 here, and every other one will have grad1 so that I can focus on the gradient class. I'll create 4 of these, 3, 4. So I have 4 of them listed here. And I'm also going to add a margin bottom to grad1. So margin bottom, say 2, so that it creates spaces between the bars. Now let's do for the first one to implement a linear gradient with side angles, that is this sides angle, this type of sides. Let's start with the first one. And the syntax for linear gradient is BG linear to top. Let's do for top. And then you can state the to and fro color. So I'm going to say from cyan 200. And you can see the color moves from the top. There is no toe color, and then it goes to the from color. The toe color is at the top because we said top, and then it moves down to the cyan 200. I'm going to copy this cyan 200 because I'm going to use it for every other one. And for this, I'll say BG linear to right, and right will be also cyan 200. And you'll see the toe color isn't specified, so from the right the toe color goes to the left, which is cyan 200. I'm just using just one color. Actually, you should use two color, but just in case you're using one color, that means the other color will be transparent. I'm going to do the same thing with the other ones. BG linear to bottom dash bottom, and then I'll also put the cyan 200, and that starts from the bottom being transparent and then goes up to cyan. And also the last one will be BG linear to left, and then I'll put the cyan 200 also. So I'm just going to change all this to reflect what they are. And I can do the same thing using two colors. So I'm just going to copy this. I'll put it here. I'll say two color. I'm going to add a toe color of blue 500. So I'll say for all of them to blue 500, and that changes the way the color looks. So the toe starts from blue 500 and then comes down to cyan. And you can see also the two start from the right, blue 500 to cyan, does the same thing for all of them. We can also do top left, top right. Let's change this one to top left. The color fades from the top here down this way. And we can also do bottom left or top right. And the other two options we have is bottom left and bottom right. I'm just going to change bottom left, bottom right, and bottom left here as shown. And let me change the description. And as the name implies, the color flows. For instance, for bottom left, the color flows from the bottom left, and then it flows to the top right here. So blue 500 will be here at most, and then also cyan 200 will be here. Let's comment this out and use number or degree instead. I'm going to duplicate this here, and for degree I'm going to change this. Let me just do for the first four so that we won't have too many colors all over the place. To replicate the to top, this, you remove the 2 and T and you change it with 0. And that does the same thing. And to R, which is to right, can be replaced with BG linear 90 degree. And you're not going to see any change. I'm just changing the values. While to bottom is 180 degree, and the to left is 240 degree. So you can either use the degree, which is shorter, or just use the sides as indicated here. We are not limited to 2 colors. We can also do a 3 color stop gradient. Let's create a parent div, and underneath I will do grad 1. No, sorry, that's grad 1, just to give me the element bar. The bar will do the work on. Let's start with a BG linear 90, which is the same thing as to R. And then let's give it a cyan from color. So I'll say from cyan 200, and then red 2 color. So to red 300. This gives these 2 colors, a cyan and a shade of red. And then to create the third color, you use the via keyword. So I want to create a green via, which is the third color. I'll say green 500, and it's going to put in that green color in between. And I said from via to, and it doesn't matter how I order this, it's still going to work because it knows the keywords that are used. Technically, This bar, these three colors, have numbers from 0 to 100. So you can specify how much space a color takes. So for instance, if I want the reddish color to start from like 70 should be somewhere around here. I'm going to come to 2, I'll say 2, and I'll put 70%. And when I do that, you see the reddish color starts somewhere at 70%. Let me make another example, and you can play around with it. For instance, I can say the from color is at 30%. If I want the color to come out very sharp, so from color here starts from 0 to like 30%. And if I want the green color also to start at 30%, it's going to create a sharp color. So the green color is the via color. I'll say via also should start at 30%. This creates a sharp color because the cyan ends at 30 and via also is starting at 30. So there is no fading or gradient in between the two. You can also use arbitrary value to specify the colors and the percentage that they take. So let's do another one, grad 1, and I'm going to do BG linear. It's a linear gradient, and then I'll put an arbitrary figures. I'll say it should be at 45 degree. You can put whatever degree you want, where it starts from and where it flows to. And then I'll say red underscore the percentage of red, I'll say 30, and yellow with an underscore the percentage of yellow, I'll say 60%. And then also I want a lime color and I want it to be at 90%, and then let the rest of the color be blue. And there should be no space between the comma separated values. And here you go. So you see it's slanted this way at 45 degree, and red is about 30% before yellow starts. Yellow flows to 60%, and then lime takes over to 90%, and then the rest is blue. You can change the degree. Let's change this to 90 degree. The color now looks straight because the degree is 90 degree. This course is part of our more than 12 hours course on Udemy titled Tailwind CSS version 4 Start to Mastery with 22 project examples. It is a comprehensive Tailwind CSS course with lots of examples to help you develop Tailwind UI and websites. Now let's create radial gradient. I'm going to start with an M2 parent div, and in there I'll generate a circle, and that circle will be size 20. Let me give it a border so that we can see what we're doing. Border gray 300, and then I'm going to make it rounded full so that it becomes a circle, and I'll give it a margin 1, and then I want it to be inline, so I'll make it inline block so that if I do more than 1, it all stays by each other. Okay, so let's just use 1, and I'm going to move this to my utility class. I'm going to take these out. I'm going to call it outliner 2. I have outliner 1 already there, so I'm just going to say dot outliner 2 and apply outliner 2. And yeah, so I have this, and now I can do a radial gradient, and the class name is BG radial, which shows that I want to do a radial gradient. And then I can do my cyan 200, my two colors if I want, to blue 500. And this is what you get. It moves from inside. The from color is the inside color, and then it goes to blue 500. Let's do another example, and this time we'll specify a via color. So I'm going to say via indigo 500 so that it could have a via color. Let's change the size to 24 so that it looks a little bigger. So I have 24, and then I can add color stops for the one that has 3 colors. So I can say the from color, which is the cyan color, should be 10%. And then you see how that changes. And you can also do for the via color also, and also the to color. I'm just going to say the via color stop should be 50%. And I'll leave it at that. Let's do another example where I have the from color being a sky 200, and then the via color being a blue 400, and also the toe color being indigo 900. And of course, I'm going to start with BG radial to know what type of gradient to do. Naturally, this from color will start from the middle, and then it goes to the via color, and then it ends at the toe color. We can change where this starts. Instead of starting at the middle, the from color is positioned at left 50% and then right 50%. If you want to change how this is positioned, you can come here with an arbitrary value on the BG radar. So I'm going to say dash and put an arbitrary value which says at. To specify the position, I'll say put it at 40% for the left position, and also is do underscore 75% for the right position. This moves the position where the from color starts from. You see, it was initially here, but right now it is showing here. It moves from here to the blue color, and then lastly to the indigo 900. That doesn't still stop me from adding stoppages. So I can say, for instance, the indigo color should start at 90% of the color gradient. And that gives a subtle gradient of indigo at the end. Let's do one more example. I'm going to say outliner 2 and do a BG radial. And it's going to be white. The from color will be white, and then the toe color will be zinc 900. And then I'm going to make the toe start at 75%. So it looks this way. Now let's add the arbitrary value to move this somewhere here. So I'm going to put an arbitrary value here, and that will be at 25%, then 25% left, and then 25% top, or 25% X and 25% Y. Let me make this 75% so that the toe zinc 800 will be more pronounced. And let's make it a hard light. So the from, I'm going to make it 10%. That is, the front should cover 10%. You see, it's a hard light. Or maybe make it 5%. Hard light, but very small. Lastly, let's talk about the conic gradient. I'm just going to copy this for radial gradient, and I'm just going to change the word radial to conic. And that changes it to a conic shape. One more thing before we round up this session. Let's talk about color interpolation. Color interpolation defines how a gradient calculates the intermediate color between two defined points. When you specify the type of gradient you want to create, you can use Tailwind modifier to switch between color interpolations. The values are as specified here, and you can use sRGB, HSL, and all these other values. Let's give it a try. I'm going to use a linear interpolation, so I'm going to use the grad one and do a linear gradient. So I'll say BG linear, and I'll do 90%. I'll make the from color indigo 500, and also the to color teal 400. If you don't specify any color interpolation, it's going to use the sRGB color interpolation, but you can use other interpolation like OK lab interpolation, and that helps to calculate how the color moves from indigo 500 to teal 500. Other ones like longer, the calculation is a hue. Let's do another example and use longer. And for longer, you see it calculates from the from color to the to color, and it specifies different hues in between the colors. Increasing also gives you that same behavior. Let me change this to increasing, and it's just going to give you that same interpolation behavior. The different hue colors can be more illustrated if we use a conic shape. So I'm going to say outliner 2, and then we're going to have a BG conic. So let's just give it a from color of violet 700, and then I'm going to give it a var color of lime 300, and then another 2 color of violet 700. This gives us a conic gradient from one violet to lime and then back to violet 700. But if we put longer here, it's going to give us a hue, and by the calculation, this is the hue it gives us. And if we choose increasing, which also gives us another hue type, it's going to give us this hue. And then we also have decreasing, and you see it's more like giving us different color wheels based on the from, to, and the var color we specified here. Hello and welcome back. In this video, we will take a look at manipulating keyframes using animation. This example will help you understand how the animation works under the hood. And we're going to be using this example where we have this keyframe defined and then the animation. And underneath here, I'm just going to put a comment that shows a keyframe illustration. It shows keyframe from 0 to 100. This keyframe is like a playhead of a video which shows you how much of the video has been played. It is represented here in percentage. For an example, a 50% keyframe that is somewhere here indicates that you have played half of the animation or video, as the case may be. Looking at the example here, you will see that at 0, that is when the playhead is just starting at the beginning, there should be no rotation, that is the rotation is 0 degree. And when it gets to 100%, that is when it is here, there should be no rotation. Basically, it should be back to 0 degree. But if you look at the 50% here, it says, let me put the keyframe, we're using rotation as an example. It is from 0, it is at 0 degree, but when it gets to about 50%, then it should have rotated to 20 degree. And afterwards, from 50% to 100% as shown here, at 100%, it should rotate back from 20 degree back to a 0 degree. And in my index file, I used an over so that when we put our mouse over it, it should do that animation. Look at it. So this is what it does. Let me change the timing to 4. 50% technically means like 2 seconds of the 4 seconds specified here. So at 50% or at 2 seconds of the animation, it should have gotten to a rotation of 20 degree. Let's look at it. So in 2 seconds it's at 20 degree, and then it's back to 0 for the next 2 seconds. Let's say we take out the 100% here. So we're saying that at 0% it should be 0 degree, and then at 50% it should be 20 degree. Then what happens between here and here? Basically what it does is that it resets itself back to its initial state, which is 0 degree. So this is the same thing like putting 100 degree here. So when you put your mouse here, it goes to 20 degree and then it returns back to 0 degree. Let's make this 100 degree so you see how that works. And when it's at 100 degree, I made it 4 seconds so we can see it go slowly. It goes to 100 and then it comes back quickly. That is, it goes to 20 degree at 100 timeline. So it goes from here for 4 seconds before it gets to 20 degree, and then the playhead returns back to this place. It starts from playhead 0, it goes to 100% playhead, and then it returns back to this place. That's why you see it had a hard reset. So it goes up to 20 degree and then it quickly comes back because it resets the playhead back here. And if you don't want it to reset the playhead, then you can say forwards. That is, the playhead should go from 0% to 100% and stay here at 100%. Let me reduce the animation to 2 seconds so that it will be faster. And let's see what this does. So the playhead goes to 20 degrees at 100% of the whole animation and stays there. Now it's not returning back because the playhead is stopping right here. Let's play around with the animation and put 2 more animation. I'm going to put this at 70%, put this at 50%, and then put this at 85%. So at 50%, I want it to move to 20 degree, and then it should move back to 10 degree at 70%, and then it should move to 15 degree at 85% of the playhead. So let's illustrate that here. So at 50% of the playhead, the rotate should be 20 degrees. So this is like 50% of the playhead. This is somewhere 50% of the playhead is going to be at 20 degree. Then 70% of the playhead, it should be at 10 degree. So 70% is somewhere here. So let's do that. So we'll say when it gets here, it should be 10 degree, and then at 80%, somewhere right here, 80%, it should do another 15 degree rotation, 15D, and then of course it plays to the end, and when it plays to the end, it resets it back to 0 degree. Let me increase the timeline to say 4 seconds, and let's see how that plays out. So when we put the mouse, it goes to 50% before it gets to 20 degree, and then it goes to 70% and returns to 10 degree rotation. Look at it again. It's 20 here, it returns to 10 degree, and then it goes to 15, and then it comes back to 0. If you want it to do infinitely, you put this at infinite. So, and that does it infinitely. Let me just put this to 2 so that the animation will be fast. And let's have it. And this is what it does. And it keeps doing it because it is at infinite. You can combine multiple timelines this way, or you can put it together. So let's do this. I'm going to say at 50%, it should be at 0 degree, and at 100%, it should be at 0 degree. Anytime the player moves from the beginning, when it gets to 50, it should be 0, and when it gets to 100, it should be 0. Then for the rotation, at 20%, it should be 20 degree, and at 80%, it should be 20 degree. Actually, it moves from 0 to 20 to 50 to 80 and then to 100. So we say at 0%, it should be at 0, and then at 20%, that is 20% of the timeline, it should be at 20. So only 20 and 80 we have 20 degree rotation, and there is 50% timeline. At 50% timeline, it should go back to 0 degree, and at 80, as shown here, 80% of the timeline is 20 degree. So we'll say 20 degree, and then at 100 is back to 0 degree. I want you to do it just once. So I'm going to take out the infinite. So, and this is what it does. Or maybe I put the infinite so we see it do it several times. Infinite means to keep doing it again and again, and then you see it move this way. Hello and welcome back. Tailwind version 4 introduces the use of 3D perspective to rotate, scale, and translate. The Z angle allows us to place the element in a 3D space. Let's do an example of a button, and it's going to be BG Blow 700, text white, rounded LG is a button, rounded XL, like XL, P horizontal 5 and PY 4. Let me just put the word quiz, and we have a button like this. I'm going to put an over effect on the button, and I'm going to use a rotate, and I'll say over rotate x50 and give it a duration of 500 so that it does it with an easing. If you put your mouse on this, you will see it just squeezes because it's actually rotating at 50 degree. Let's do this button again, and this time I'm going to add another over, which will translate the button on y-axis by 10 degree. If you put your mouse on it, you see it just goes down, and then it also kind of crouch. So I'm going to call this crouch. See, coming down and then kind of bending down. So, and then I'm going to have a third button. This button I will call slant because I want to add a z-index rotation when I put my mouse on it. So I'm going to call it slant, and then with an over of rotate z20. If you put your mouse on it, you see it translates down just like the way this crouch is, but then it has a perspective to it. It's slanted by 20 degree. Let me make the classes into a utility layer. I'll say layer utilities, and the first will be the squeeze. I'll use apply to copy in those values, and the second is crouch. I'll also use apply to copy in the Tailwind classes value, and then the third will be slant, and I'll do the same. So let me copy in those values now. This will be, I'll take all this out and put it in squeeze. I just want it to be reusable and use it on another element. And then for crouch, I'll take all this out and put it on crouch. And then for slant, let me add some more classes to slant. I'll have a shadow XL, and then on over again, the shadow should be gray 900, so that when we put our mouse on it, it has a shadow when it slants and docks. Let's take out all that values and put it in slant. Okay, so I'm going to use an image to express this, and I'm going to put it in a flex container. I'll have 3 images there. The first image, well, basically one image, but I'm going to use it 3 times. So I'm going to specify where the image is stored. It's in images, and the image name is 1.jpg, and then I'll give it a size of 32, and I'm going to call this squeeze. Squeeze is written somewhere here. Okay, let me create another class to entertain that, to expand it. So I'll say apply. I'll use a flex, justify center, items central, text white, and then text 3XL, so that I could call center here. And then you can see the squeeze now. Let me give this a margin Y3 so that it separates. Okay, so I'm going to have 3 of this separated by a space X4, and then I'm going to use, for the first one, I'm going to use the squeeze class. The second will be the crouch class, and then the third will be the slant class, so that it does what these other ones do. And now if you put your mouse on squeeze, you see it squeezes, and the second is crouch, and the third is slant. The second one crouches, and then the third one slouts. Okay, I'm going to put all that also here. Squeeze, crouch, and slant. You can see how the slant is bent in 3D space because we use the Z coordinate in specifying how it should render. That is, the slant is using a Z coordinate here, that is rotate Z 20. You can play around with this rotate Z and rotate X to have a more 3D perspective. Let's change this to 70 and see how that translates. You can see it is also more slanted than it was before, and it's also in a 3D space. Hello and welcome back. Let's create custom animation in Tailwind version 4. The default animation as provided in Tailwind version 4 are spin, bounce, ping, and pulse. In this tutorial, let's create a custom animation that dangles an element on the page. Now let's start the creation. I'm going to create a font bold, a heading that is font bold and text 3XL, and in there I will just put custom animation. I'll take this out, custom animation, and then I'm going to create a 2-column grid that will take in an image and some text. So I'll say grid calls to 2-column grid, and in between will be a text that is lorem 50, and then after that I'm going to create an image that I have stored in my images folder. So that will be URL images. I'm going to give it a height of 72 and a width of 52. And this is supposed to be inside the grid so that it will be a 2-column grid. So I'm going to take this and put it inside the grid so that it will come here. And then I'm going to make this BG cover so that all the image will show in the specified space. Now let's create a keyframe that I will store under a utility layers. So I'll say utilities, and then I'll create a keyframe. You use keyframes as the keyword to create keyframes, and the name of the keyframes will be rotator, or maybe I should call it dangler because I want it to dangle stuff. And at 0% and 100% of the animation, it should do a transform that has a rotate 0 degree and also translate X 0 degree. So it starts at 0 and ends at 0. Then I will also have at 50%, it should move, that is the transform should move to a rotate of 20 degree, and the translate X should also be minus 70 degree, that is, it should move minus 70 pixel, that it should move X coordinates by 70 pixel. This is transform, and okay. So on the timeline, it should stay at the initial state, that is no rotate and no translate at the initial state and at the end state. But in the middle of the transformation, it should have rotated by 20 degree and also move horizontally by minus 70 pixel. Now we'll use the at utility directive to define the class that we will use, and that will be dangle, and that will be an animation which we will call the name of the keyframe, and I'll say it should work for 1 second, and then use the ease in and out, and then I'll make it an infinite animation. This is infinite. Okay, now that we have the keyframe, and then when we do class dangle, it should run this animation using the keyframe and then doing it infinitely. Let's put that here in the image. I'm going to say dangle. You would see it begins to dangle. It begins to move left and right using the animation that was specified. We could use an over. With the over, we'll have to put your mouse on it before it does that. And because it works on any element, we can do the same for the, let's say the text, this text, so that when we over it, it should dangle. Let's see how that runs. You can see the text is dangling because we have the dangle class on it. We can do it also on the heading dangle also. This is how we create a custom animation using Tailwind version 4. Hello and welcome back. Let's talk about using third-party Tailwind CSS UI component that you can integrate into your Tailwind project. There are several providers. The popular ones are Flowbyte. You can get to it at this URL. Daisy UI, Tailwind Elements, Headless UI, Tailwind CSS Animate. This third-party UI component helps you create customized component with little or no effort. Let's set it up in our project. Let's install Flowbyte, and I'm going to put the installation process for installing Flowbyte UI on your project. And let's just start with a heading and then follow the step. The first step is to install Flowbyte with npm install Flowbyte. I'm going to open a new terminal and navigate to the folder that hosts my project. And then in the folder, I'll type npm install Flowbyte. This installs Flowbyte, and if you check the file, you will see the node_modules folder that has Flowbyte installed, and in the package.json file, you will see Flowbyte installed. Now let's go back to our input.css and add the Flowbyte as a plugin. So I'm going to put that here. You say at plugin Flowbyte/plugin, and then the next part will be to add the paths to where Flowbyte is in node_modules. If you check it, you see it is node_modules and then Flowbyte. So that will add with the add source directive, add source, and then this is the path to Flowbyte. Then we open flowbyte.com. In the docs link on the sidebar, you see components, and then you can install any of these components. I'm just going to install a carousel and pick any examples. This is a carousel, and you can see how carousel works. So I'm just going to pick any of the examples. I'm going to copy this one and open my index.html where I want to put the Flowbyte, and then just paste it there. And I've added images that I want it to flow with. You can see images 111, 222, and 333. That is 3 images is what the carousel will be sliding with. Lastly, you're gonna add the CDN that will animate the carousel. So let's go to document, and then in quick start, you scroll down to where it shows this script. So you copy the script and then back to your HTML, and at the bottom, just before the end body, you paste in the script, and voila, you have the carousel, and it works perfectly well. There are some integration differences when using other third-party components. Check their documentation to know how to properly install them. Hello and welcome back. Tailwind affords us the opportunity to create different layers of built-in style. For instance, I can create a style, say text 3XL for font size, and then make it bold. All these are predefined Tailwind styles. With the CSS first approach of Tailwind version 4, we can easily create new custom CSS style grouped under a base, component, or utilities layer. Let's assume we want to create a header, and I'm calling it header 1. And this actually doesn't come out as a header 1 style because Tailwind automatically disables all the pre-formatting that came with it. You can also see the H2 doesn't change, and even a button doesn't really look like a button. It's actually a button there. So we're going to use our Tailwind CSS layer to create the styles. And we create the style under a layer directive. For H1, H2 elements, we create them under the base layer. So I'm going to say layer base. Again, HTML elements like H1, H2 are created under the base layer. So I'm going to change the font size to 35 pixel. And for every H1, it's going to take on the 35 pixel that I created here. And I'm going to make the H2 also a font size of 25 pixel. And the H2 now comes out as a 25 pixel tag. So anytime you call H1 or H2, it's going to be using this as the default formatting. And also, I want to create a button. A button has several CSS style attached to it. So I'm going to put it under a component layer because a button could be called a component. So I'll put that under the component layer, and then I'll do the custom class btn, and I'll give it a padding of 8 pixel. Let's go back and put the CSS on this button. So I'll say class btn, which takes on this btn so that we can see how that changes as we do the styling. So I'll say CSS 18 and 8 and 16. I'll give it a border radius of 7 pixel and border width of 1 pixel, and then border color. I'm going to use a variable color gray 300. And if you still want to use the Tailwind CSS classes, you can just use the apply directive and then put in the styling. So I'm going to say px3 py2, and then I'm going to give it rounded LG and give it a border and border gray 300. And this also comes out this way. So you can either use any of these, and we put it under their layers so that they can be well grouped when the CSS is rendering. Welcome back. Let's improve on how the button appears in this example. Now I'm going to create a utility called .bg gradient, and I'm going to put it under a utility layer, utilities, and call it bg gradient orange, which will serve as a gradient orange background to the button, and on over an orange glow appears on the button. Now let's do the gradient orange here. Let's put it in our HTML. So I'm going to say bg gradient orange so that as we style this, you can be seeing how that changes. I'm going to create some theme variable that I will use as color. So I'm going to say theme curly brace, and that will be color orange 1, which is a light orange shade, and then color orange 3, another shade of orange, and then color orange 5, which is a medium orange shade. So we're going to be using these colors in our definition of gradient orange. Again, you can use just your vanilla CSS to implement the background. So I'm going to say background. I'm going to use vanilla CSS first. I'll say gradient. It should be a 90-degree gradient. And then the start color is going to be color orange 3. And then the end color, which I'll call with the var keyword, is going to be color orange 5. And as you can see, it automatically shows the gradients as the background. Let's give it a white color, I can just put in white here directly. If you like, you could use a variable text white. I'm going to implement an orange over. That is, anytime you put your mouse on the BG gradient orange class, it should give you an over effect. There are about two ways to do this. I'm going to use the first one, and that is inside the class, we can create a variant and specify that it's an over variant. So whatever you put here, whatever styling you put here will activate when you over the element. So let's do box shadow, say 005 pixel 2 px also, and then let's give it a color orange 3. Let's see how that works out. And right now you can see that there is a glow effect that shows on it. I can zoom in on it so that you can see it very well. So here, right here, you can see the glow effect on the button. And if you're no longer conversant with using vanilla CSS, then use the @apply directive to apply Tailwind specific classes on it. So let's comment this out. Actually, this is not going to work, but I just wanted to see why it's not working. And I'll say apply, and let's do BG gradient from orange, let's say orange 300 to orange 500. Let's use this. You can see it's giving me some fault. It says cannot apply on non-utility class variant, and that's because we're using two directive right inside this class. It's not going to work. You can only use vanilla CSS and then the variant. If you want to do it the other way, then you'll have to create the over in another way. Let's call this 2 so that we remove all the styling, and then do another one. Let's make it 1 now. And if you put this, that is the vanilla CSS, is going to work. And if you don't want to do that, if you just want to do the Tailwind specific CSS, you can use apply and say BG linear 90 degree from orange 3 to orange 5, and then I'll make the text white. So this works. Now let's do the over. The over now will be the same class but with an over pseudo, and then we can apply the over. I'm just going to use that box shadow, and then I'm going to put the value for the box shadow, and then on over you see the glow effect of the over shows in. So you either do it this way or you wrap it up together this way, but for this you will not be able to use the apply here because it's not going to work because it has two directives in one class. This course is part of our more than 12 hours course on Udemy titled Tailwind CSS version 4 Start to Mastery with 22 project examples. It is a comprehensive Tailwind CSS course with lots of examples to help you develop Tailwind UI and websites. Hello and welcome back. Let's see how we can implement dynamically generated classes using Tailwind version 4. Dynamically generated classes in Tailwind version 4 allows you to generate more complex and customizable style that adapts to your project need. Let's start by creating a circle that can take in different predefined size like SM, MD, LG, and XL circle sizes. And to start that, we're going to create the theme variables for all these sizes. So I'm going to call it circle size SM. I'll make that 3 rem. Then again, circle size MD. You'll notice the pattern that I'm using to name it. Circle size is the same thing. What changes is the SM and MD. So I'll make this 5 rem. Then circle size LG will be 7 rem. And circle size XL, I'll make that 10 rem. Because I want to create a circle, I'm going to create a radius full variable, and that will just be 99999 pixel, which is equivalent to a full radius. To create a dynamically generated class, we're going to be using the @utility directive, and I'm going to call it circle dash asterisk. The asterisk now is what will be dynamically generated, and the values that it will take is the width. We will define the width here. Let me just put 0 for now. The width, the height, and also the border radius. So the first thing to do is to create a value, the value that will be replaced, and that will be value, and the value will be I'm going to use the @circle size dash, and then instead of saying smmdlg, I'm also going to put an asterisk in front. So whatever value I enter here will be replaced with this, and then it will convert it to whatever value that stands for. So let's also do for the height, and that will be circle asterisk. And for the border radius, that will be, I'll use a variable, reference the radius full variable that was defined here. So if you say circle sm in your element, it should create a width of 3 rem, a height of 3 rem, and then change the rounded to full, which is this border radius. So let's do that here. I'm going to apply it to an image, img, and the source will be images. I have a file there that is called 111.jpg, this file, and then also I'm going to put the class, which is circle, and I'm just going to use circle lg. That didn't work. Let's see where the error is. Yeah, we didn't put a column here to separate this, and then you can see right now that it becomes a circle. It uses 7 rem to render the circle. It makes it 7 rem width, 7 rem height, and then also a full radius. And we can also do XL. I think we have XL there. It creates a bigger circle. You can also turn div element to a circle. So let me just give a div element an orange 200, and also do the circle, let's say SM, and you see that circle comes up here. Orange 200 circle SM comes here. Let's create 4 more. I'll say orange 300, orange 400, and orange 500, and also change the circle to MD, LG, and XL. Okay, so I'm just going to put in an inline block so that it all stays on one line. So I'll say inline block. So you see these divs are made into circle because of the utility circle dash asterisk, which is a dynamic class. Instead of using predefined values, you might also want to do the one that you can use whatever number you like. So we're going to create these again, and this time we're going to say utility circle asterisk, and again we create the width. I'll just do it the same way I did the other time. The width, the height, and then the border radius, which is var dash dash radius full. So let's look at how to generate this so that any integer you put in will be acceptable as a size to use. So for the width, we're going to pass in value using the dash dash value and then the integer value. We just say integer here. That will pass in whatever value we substituted with here. And I'm going to do the same thing here. I'll say value integer. And then I can come to my code. Let me comment this out and just use only this. I'll say 32, and let's see what happens to that. Well, it tries to do it, but it's not doing it as expected. And this is because if you look at the output.css file, you look at circle 32 actually converts it to width 32, height 32, but it's not specifying the unit of measurement as rem or pixel. We need to do that so that it will recognize that it's in pixel. So just behind it, I'm going to say px and then px also. And that gives me a 32 pixel circle. Let's make it a bigger pixel. Let's say 60 pixel. A better way to do it is to use Tailwind measurement method that multiplies 0.25 rem with any integer value. What we'll do is we'll take out this px and then we'll say calculate this value and multiply it by 0.25 rem. And I'm going to do the same thing here because it is the same calculation. And you can see 60 looks bigger. It looks more like it will render if we use 60 height and width in Tailwind. So when I say 30, it's smaller, but not as small as the 30 of just pixel alone. So with that, we can change. Let's uncomment this. We can change all the figures for this. Right now, it's not going to work because we're using circle SM. Let's change the first one to circle 10 and change the second to 20. Let me re-render it. And then you see it come out. And then change the third one to 32 and the last one to 52. Let's re-render it. And then you see it shown here. And because we're using integer to calculate the width and height, you can use whatever number you want to use. And it's going to render that. As you can see, this is 72 for a bigger circle here. Let me return it back to 52. And this is what we get, just exactly the way we did with the first predefined SM, MD, LG, and XL numbers. You can also add a variant, an over variant, or whatever variant you want to add to it. So I can say over and just use apply and say scale to 105 and make the scale smooth, so that when you put your mouse over it, it scales just a little bit. So let's see how that works. You see, just a little scale out. This is much easier to achieve using Tailwind version 4. Hello and welcome back. If you check out all the examples we've done, the header example and then the circle example, you would see that our CSS input file begins to grow. But we don't have to put all of them here. We can separate them into different files and then import them into the input.css file. So let's create another file. I'm going to call that top format.css, just whatever name you want to call it. And then I'm going to copy the theme and the code to this point where I defined all this. I'll cut that out and then put it here. And then I'll take out the circle definition because that is for circle. And you see, it's back to the way it was. And then I'm going to create another file in the CSS folder. I'm going to call it circle CSS. And then I'll go back to the input and then copy out all the files, put it in circle. I have to also put the themes variable that are part of creating the dynamic circle class. So we have the circle CSS in the circle CSS file, and then also the top format.css file. So now we go back to our input.css file, and then we use the @import directive to import these files. Since they are in the same folder, I'm just going to say .top format.css. And I expect it to, import in all the classes that did this format. And then also I'm going to do @import circle.css to bring in all the circle related dynamic classes. This enables you to break down your classes into segments so that you can properly organize your project. Welcome back. When you install Tailwind, it initializes every element, leaving it bare. Then you have to style every element to your desired look. Tailwind, however, supplies some opinionated plugins that add simple style to your elements. There are plugins for typography, form styling, and others. Let's see how you install and add a plugin. In this example, we'll add a form plugin. Take a look at this form. It's just a bare form without styling. The only part that is styled is the button, and you see the button style is here. Now let's add a form plugin to it. The first thing we'll do is go to your command line and make sure you are in the folder where your project is, and then you can now install the plugin with npm install. We're going to install a form plugin, which is at Tailwind CSS /forms, and then I'll let that install. And if you check our file, you will see that here we have a node modules folder, and then the package.json shows that Tailwind form has been installed. Now that we have that installed, let's go to our input.css file and then add the plugin here. This time we'll use the plugin directive plugin, and then we'll specify the name that is at Tailwind CSS /forms. This is plugin, and immediately you see that it gives a form an opinionated form style to it. You can download whatever plugin you like and then install it this way using the at plugin directive. Hello and welcome back. In this video, we will build an animated gradient background that can be used to create animated website background. This is commonly used in hero section of your page or on a landing page. We will be taking a look at doing this with different variation using gradient, images, and with components. Here are examples of the page we will be creating. The first page example shows a gradient animation on a hero section of a landing page. As you can see the way the gradient moves. The second example shows a page with a blurred animated image background underneath. The third example shows the animated image under a card component. And then the fourth is similar to the third, but this time it puts a gradient animation in a card component. Let's start with an animated gradient page. For this example, the animated background will be created with gradient colors and will be attached to the body element of the page. Let's start by creating a utility class that we can use to center the animated background text that is here. We just create a utility layer that I'm going to call center HV and apply a flex items center, justify center, then a min height of screen, and I'm just going to put that center HV here so that it centers this. But actually I want to put my animated gradient on the body element, so I'm going to create another layer. This is going to be a base layer. I'm going to do my gradient on the body tag. We can use any form of gradient, either radial gradient or linear gradient, but I'm just going to start with a radial gradient. Apply BG radial, and that'll start from indigo 700 via a purple 500, and it's going to go to blue 900. This gives us this look. And now I'm going to create a keyframe to move the gradient around. So I'm going to come here and say at keyframes, and I'll call it left right part. It should just move across left and right. And I'm going to use the background position to move around the keyframe. So I'll start with keyframe 0%, and that will be background position. Position starting from 0% horizontal and 50% vertical, and that starts at center left, and that is somewhere here. And then I'm going to say at 50% timeline, Okay, let me just copy this and then change the values. At 50% timeline, do background position starting at 100% horizontal, that is, it should be here, and then 50% vertical. So it's going to start from here and then moves to this place. So that's why we're moving from left to right. So this is right center. So it moves from left to right. At 0% timeline is at 0%, and then at 50% timeline it's at the right side, and then we should have it return back to the left side, and that's, I'll say, comma 100%, that is at 100% timeline again it should return back to the left side. Now let's put the animation in the body tag, and that would be animation, and then I'll call the name left right part on the animation. I'll say for 25 seconds ease, and then do it infinitely. Actually, it's not going to work because this image is at 100%, so it's not going to be able to move off the screen because it's at 100% of the viewpoint. So what we're going to do is to increase this gradient to more than 100%, then it can begin to move. So we're going to resize the gradient to 400% left and right, and because we have it increased now, you see it begins to move across the page. You can see the movement. It moves here and then it comes back also. Now let's add the text. I'm going to change this to innovate, integrate, and inspire, just like we did here. I'm going to put this in an H1 tag. Let me take out the text and put a div as a parent tag, and then I'm going to create an H3 tag where I'll put in the other text. I have this one and then this text there. I'm going to change the H1 and H3 tag styling in my base. So I'll come here and say H1. Okay, let me say every H1 tag and every H2 and H3 tag should have font semi-bold and also text gray 900. Okay, so but for an H1 tag, and it should have text 4XL, margin bottom 2, and at midpoint it should have text 5XL, and midpoint also should be margin bottom 3. At large point it should be text 6XL. That is for all H1 tag. And then for H3 tag also, I'm going to apply text 2XL and M text at midpoint text 3XL. And then I come to the parent div of the text and then do text center so that it centers all the text here. And then when I drag it, you see the text increases as I move it across the screen. Okay, let me change the colors of the text. I'll make this text white, the H1 to be text white, and then the H3 will be text purple. I'm going to make it a light purple so that it blends with the background. Text purple 300. That's close enough. It's just something like this. I don't want to go into the details of making it exactly like the way this is because that's not the essence of this tutorial. The essence is to have this background animate, and that we've done with our code here where we have the body having a radial background. Let me reduce it and then do some other background options we can have with the body. You can also use some other gradient. Let's comment this out and then change this to linear gradient, linear 90 gradient, and you see the gradient will change. We'll be moving from right to left in this straight gradient. You can also change the angle, of course, with maybe change this to 120, and that changes the angle at which it moves. You see it moves this way this time. And if you really want to play with gradient background, you can use this style of gradient background that is BG linear, and then you specify the calculation this way. That is, this is the degree, 90 degree, and then you can put as much color difference as you want. You can see how this is going. Let's change it to 120, and then you see it moves the other way using this background, and this color stops. The 20% to 20% is a color stop. Let's do another example using radio background, and you can see how this is all coming out. You can check the gradient background tutorial to see how to specify all these arbitrary value parameters for gradient. There's a lot of style you can achieve using this gradient style, and it's just knowing how exactly how gradient works. You can see this is what we did the other time, but here is what we have here using arbitrary values and gradient manipulation. The advantage of having the gradients placed on the body element is that whatever page we open in our project will inherit the body element. I just opened another page I called index 2. Right now it's not showing anything. If I type something on it, it's going to try to mimic that gradient. It's not showing very well now because I'm supposed to put a screen height. So I'm going to say on this apply, I'll just put a screen height. The gradient should cover the whole viewport, and then automatically you see the gradient covers the whole viewport, and then you don't really need to type anything. The moment you open a new page, you see that gradient comes right on it. And because it's a background, you're at liberty to still do all the things on the foreground of the page. I just created a div, and I'm going to give it BG white with a padding 3, which serves as a new background. And then I'll just put some words in there, and then you see this is the background, and on it is a white middle ground where your content and design can reside. This course is part of our more than 12 hours course on Udemy titled Tailwind CSS version 4 Start to Mastery with 22 project examples. It is a comprehensive Tailwind CSS course with lots of examples to help you develop Tailwind UI and websites.